Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. And most of you who are here tonight, I pray this is going to be a blessing to you all. And then I want to say good evening to those who are watching online. This is a very special program. And then I look forward to hear what God I know has blessed Dr. Baker Jr. with, so that I and all of us can learn something new for the glory of God. I won't take too long. The way we're going to do this today, I believe Dr. Baker Jr. will speak for about 45 to 50 minutes, give and take, and then he will leave a room for question and answer if you have any questions for him. And he'll do the same tomorrow. He'll share with you, then he'll leave enough room, or I would say minutes, for you guys to ask questions, and he will answer your question based on his capabilities. And then this evening, I want to say just a few things before we start, because we have people watching online, and we have we have a lot of people in here. I had a lot of emails. So we know there's people really interested in knowing what's going on in the Duluth Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, this evening, Elder Baker, the Duluth Seventh-day Adventist Church is delighted to have you. They've been waiting for this moment, and then I've been waiting for this moment. So I pray that God be with you. For those who are watching, Dr. Baker, just very small, I'll introduce him more tomorrow. For those who are watching online, Dr. Baker, L. Scott Baker Jr. is the Associate Director at Andrews University Press, and then is also co-host of the Hope Channel program called Inside the Bible. And he also, by God's grace, managing and be the director of an online ministry called Builders of Faith. Me and Elder Baker, we have worked together in the same church board. We have worked as elders, and we have sat down and let the Holy Spirit lead us to lead his people. This is a man that I learned a lot from. So wherever you're watching, and anyone who's in here, I pray that this time of Dr. Baker here in Duluth would be a blessing to you. So tonight's topic, it's about a presentation of the date and length of sojourn to help answer the pyramids question. This is covered under the archaeology of the Exodus that we will see throughout today and tomorrow for half a day, because many people discuss a debate about 7 significant debates in the area of the Exodus, and Dr. Baker Jr. will try to answer most of them in the little time that he has. And I hope that it's a blessing to you. So Dr. Baker tonight will explain how archaeology shows Bible stories coherence. So as you're getting ready to hear the words from Dr. Baker, let's have a word of prayer. Father God in heaven, here we are, getting ready to spend time with you in your Sabbath day. As we preparing to enter the Sabbath hours, we pray that your Spirit be with us. And as Dr. Baker Jr. will present, I pray that your Spirit be with him, so that we can all be edified, and our faith will go stronger, knowing that what we have heard and believe is actually coming out alive for those who are in doubt. May you speak to him. May you bless them. May you speak to us. May your will be done in the Duluth Seventh-day Adventist Church this evening. Thank you, Father, for your presence. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Brothers and sisters, friends who are watching online, now hear Dr. Scotty Baker Jr. with us. Thank you.
Well, welcome to Archaeology of the Exodus. I am pleased to be back in Minnesota. I actually lived for a year in International Falls when I was in 3rd grade. My dad was a pastor there, and I remember how smelly it was across the Canadian border from that paper plant, but I also remember taking a tour to an iron ore mine. Well, I don't know how far we went down. I probably didn't go down very far at all, but it seemed very amazing to me to go underground. And now I'm an archaeologist, an Egyptian archaeologist, and I get to go in the tombs and pyramids, and so I'll show you some of that tonight. Before we begin, I'll just read this one text that actually comes. It's translated by Mark Lerner. I'll show you a picture of him a little later. He's actually one of the experts in the pyramids. This is a translation of the pyramid text, which again, I'll also show you in a few minutes. It says, any god, this is the Egyptians speaking, any gods who shall cause this pyramid and this construction of the king to be good and sturdy, it is they who will be vital, it is they who will be respected, it is they who will be impressive, it is they who will be in control. It is they who will take possession of the crown. So this is a blessing by the pyramid builders onto the gods, which is a little odd, but that's the Egyptian cosmology was a little odd. They didn't think of their gods the same way we think of ancient gods. We think of gods that need to be appeased, they need to give offerings to, but the Egyptian gods were quite a bit different. They believed that the gods actually partnered with humanity to maintain balance and push back the forces of chaos. And so it was more of a partnership kind of relationship. And this is sort of why you see something like this in future presentations, not this weekend, but if you invite me back, I can show you more about the gods and talk a little bit more about that. But for tonight, we're going to answer this basic question: did Israel build the pyramids? And basically to do that, we have to answer the question, when were the Hebrews in Egypt? To begin, we'll start with someplace that everybody understands and knows, Alexander the Great. Of course, Alexander the Great conquered the known world, and when he died, his kingdom was divided up. I don't know if we can get this front light off and make it a little bit better, but if he divided his kingdom into 4, and 4 generals took over. Of course, Egypt was controlled by Ptolemy. Ptolemy, you can see this is actually a bust of him, a Greek bust there, and an Egyptian pharaoh bust here. You see, they don't look very much like each other at all, but he looked something like that. That was Ptolemy the First. It was either him or it was his son, who again, here's a Greek bust and a pharaoh bust, an Egyptian one, and then his picture on a coin, none of which really, well, he's not a very handsome fellow, but anyway, it was either him, it was either him or his son, this guy here. One of the two are the ones who instituted the Library of Alexandria. We don't know which one it was, but whoever it was, and there's debate about that, we're not going to talk about that tonight. One of them did the Library of Alexandria, and the whole idea was they wanted to get all the known knowledge of the world in Greek there and save it. And you can see kind of a representation of how they stored their, I'll go back one slide actually, so you can see how they kind of put their scrolls all together, kind of roll them up. Well, if you see here, they have like a wine cellar where you put them like a triangle and you kind of stack the wine bottles. It's the same kind of idea for scrolls. Well, they got all this knowledge together, including, by the way, the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Hebrew writings, and that's called the Septuagint. It was written at this time, and that's a very important text. We'll come back to that later. But these guys were a little bit like, they were little scoundrels. What they would do is if a ship came into harbor in Alexandria, they would go on board and they would confiscate any documents they might have that they thought were important. They would, if they needed to be translated, they would translate them and save them. If it was already in Greek, they would copy them. Oh, that's much better. Thank you. They would copy them, and then they would keep the original and give the copy back to the ship. But anyway, unfortunately, the Library of Alexandria was destroyed by fire later on. But the reason why I mention this is because at the same time, there was an Egyptian priest named Manetho. And Manetho, they asked him to write down the history of the pharaohs in Greek. And so he did it. Now, unfortunately, we don't have his work. It was lost in time. But we do have some translations of it. Josephus translates it. Eusebius, Africanus, they translate it. Unfortunately, they don't always quote it the same way, so that makes it a little bit difficult. But we kind of can piece back together the idea of the history of ancient Egypt. And what he did that was so important is he divided Egypt up into dynasties, the ruling families. Today we debate that, whether the dynasties are real or not, whether they actually exist the way he described them. I mean, who's going to argue with the guy who is closer to it than we are? But people do. But anyway, whether they're real or not, they are useful in understanding Egyptian history. So let me explain the chronology of Egypt a bit for those who may not understand it, to talk about history, you have to understand the chronology. It's divided up into three basic kingdoms. These kingdoms are times when Egypt was all unified under one ruler. And the oldest one is called the Old Kingdom. The newest one is the New Kingdom. And the one in the middle we call the Middle Kingdom, because Egyptian archaeologists are very creative people, right? Okay, so it's old, middle, new. Okay, in between, just following each of these kingdoms is a time period of chaos where multiple rulers were ruling, and we call those intermediate periods. They're first, second, and third. Again, not very difficult. Before the Old Kingdom was an early dynastic period, and after the third intermediate period is a late period. So there's an early period and a late period. And then before the early is a pre, and after the late is a Ptolemaic period, which is when the Library of Alexandria was made. And then there's the Roman era. I'm going to show you some things from each of these periods of time so you kind of get an idea of the culture of ancient Egypt. The pre-dynastic period, this is the time we have the Narmer palette. The Narmer palette, this is actually one palette, the front side and the back side. And that shows a character. Do I have a pointer on this? I think right there, yep. Okay, so if you can follow this right here, you can't see it very well in the picture, I don't have it really well, but right here is his name. His name translated into English means angry catfish. So apparently there were catfish in the Nile, and they came off this little electric current shock, and so they didn't like that very much anyway, but his name, Narmer, is maybe a little more palatable, sorry the pun, but anyway, that's his name. And it's on the front, you have him smiting these other, they call them marshmen, the people that lived in the marshlands. He's wearing the crown of Upper Egypt. We'll talk about that some more tomorrow. Over here, he's wearing the red crown. We'll talk again about that tomorrow. But you can see him kind of uniting Egypt. So as the first king, whether he was or not, it's really hard to know, but he's uniting. Also, you see here in her eyes, this little blue stone. It's lapis lazuli. That actually comes from Afghanistan. At that time period, that's the only place it came from. And if you know how far away Afghanistan is from Egypt, it's quite a long distance. And the reason why I point that out to you is because you see this artwork is not shabby. This is actually pretty good artwork for a very, very early period of time. And as people who believe in the Bible and believe that we were smarter and we're getting less smart, intelligent in our brains as we go through time, we shouldn't be surprised to see some very amazing artwork, including boats, a lot of boats. In other words, they had travel and connections from Afghanistan all the way to Egypt at this very, 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 very early date. All right, after the pre-dynastic period is an early period. This is when the dynasties happen because Narmer unites it, and when he unites it, you have actually the first couple dynasties. This is how they buried their kings. They buried them in these kind of flat burial places. And again, you can kind of see the artwork is not too bad. Then the Old Kingdom, the first kingdom comes, and there's actually only one ruler. This is kind of a period of time where the Old Kingdom kind of gets the golden age. It's the time of pyramids, the time of the great Giza pyramids. I'll show you all those pyramids in a bit. The Sphinx, of course, and others. And then the first intermediate period is this, again, time where there's multiple rulers ruling. The culture itself doesn't really, it takes a little bit of a hit, I guess, artistically, but again, it's not too bad. This isn't too bad art. It's not quite as good as it was before. But then the Middle Kingdom comes. In the Middle Kingdom, it's a time when the kings were powerful, but actually the governors, we call them nomarchs because they ruled over, they were rulers, like monarch, nomarch. They ruled over nomes, like little counties or whatever. And so they actually had more power than the king, and the king had to actually work with them a lot more. But during this time, they had these really amazing wooden models. And so in a lot of the tombs of the Middle Kingdom, you'll find these wooden models. The wooden models are very, very useful for seeing in 3 dimensions how they actually dress and how they look. This is some Nubian soldiers that were hired to be part of the mercenaries in their army. This is a woman carrying a basket and wearing a colorful dress. This is the Middle Kingdom. Actually, it's dynasties, the last part of the 11th dynasty to the first part of the 13th dynasty. Then the second intermediate period is the time when rulers from the Levant area, the Palestine area, southern Levant area, came in and took over Egypt. They were called the Hyksos. They brought in war chariots and battle axes and compound bows and all this weaponry that Egypt had adopted. But at that time, they also had very nice, used very nice artistry. Look at this vase. That's amazing. This is a battle axe, by the way, right here. Second intermediate period. Then it was united again into the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom is when all the kings you probably are familiar with. This is the time when we had Thutmose, when we had Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, the female, who was a king. She was a queen first, then she became king. And all these famous kings. Ramses the Great is in this same time period. This is the New Kingdom. It's probably the height of the empire as far as expansion over into the Levant and Mesopotamia area, also south, a little further in Africa. And then the third intermediate period is a time of chaos. There's some very important biblical periods that things happen in there. There's Shushank and some others. And then the late period is the time in the Babylonians and then the Persians came in these last two parts. Again, this artistry is very, very great here. It's very nice. You can see it changing a little bit. It becomes a little bit more refined. And then the Ptolemaic period takes over. This is where Cleopatra was queen, the Rosetta Stone, and some other things that happened there, of course. And then finally the Roman period, which the art just became very Roman. Even though it was Egyptian, they actually painted faces on mummies. It was a very different period of time. Well, it was during the Roman period that Josephus was in Palestine area, and he wrote in his book of Antiquities, they, that's the Egyptians, set them, that's the Hebrews, to build the pyramids. So the whole idea about the pyramids being built by the Hebrews while they were in Egypt comes from Josephus. So we're going to test Josephus tonight and see if he was right or not. By the way, this is a Roman bust of Josephus, and this is a line drawing that happened sometime later. He looks obviously much better here than he does here. But anyway, maybe this is how good-looking fellows looked in Roman period. I'm not sure. So what do we know about the people who built the pyramids? What do we know about them? Well, most of our knowledge starts with Napoleon, because in the late 1700s, Napoleon took an army into Egypt famously, but along with him, he took a group of savants, of scholars, and they copied many of the walls and things. They didn't do a spectacular job, but it's valuable because a lot of those monuments they copied no longer exist, or they were stolen, put into private collections, or just destroyed. And so a lot of them, also the Rosetta Stone was found. The Rosetta Stone, if you of course are very familiar with the Rosetta Stone, I'm sure, but if you may not know, maybe you know, that it was found actually in a fortress. The local Egyptians didn't know the value, didn't know what it was worth, and so there was a big stone, big basalt stone. It's this huge, massive thing about this thick, and they had it actually in the wall of a fortress to protect them against the French. And so when the soldiers saw it, they said, "Oh, this is important." So they called the scholars and they saved it. That's an important document, obviously, because it's how we translate hieroglyphs. When they found it, it actually has 3 scripts on it. This bottom script here is Koine Greek. It's the same Greek that appears in the New Testament. So what the New Testament was written in. So immediately they could read it. They could read this part here. So they knew what it said. It actually was a later Ptolemy, and it was written by priests at the time, because that later Ptolemy, I can't remember if it's Ptolemy 7 or 8, I can't remember his name, maybe it's 6. Anyway, a later Ptolemy, he gave them tax breaks, and they were very, very happy. I know if we got tax breaks, we'd be very happy too. But so they want to put monuments all over telling everybody about how great he was for giving the priests tax breaks. And so what they did is they wrote it in Greek, because that was the Ptolemies were Greek. And they also put it in this Demotic script. The Demotic script and the hieroglyphic script are both Egyptian. This, of course, is Greek. There's 2 different scripts. The Demotic script looks like this. It actually was what was being able to read by the common people. And so the Greek people in Egypt could read this bottom one. The common Egyptian people could read this one. And they always this actually should be much, much bigger here, but a lot of it was lost. That's the language of the gods. And so since the priests wrote it, they had to use the language of the gods, the script of the gods, so they used hieroglyphs. At the time, these 2 couldn't be read, although this was read shortly afterward. And as soon as they finished deciphering this, they actually were working on this from other materials, and they figured it out. Then they realized these said the same thing. And once they realized it said the same thing, then they suddenly realized the importance, of course, of the stone, and that hieroglyphs could be read. If you could figure out what these said, you probably could figure out what this said, correlating it. And they were able to, of course, Jean-Francois Champollion figured it out, and we end up with hieroglyphs. Now we can read hieroglyphs, and it's amazing. Actually, I do that every December. I go to Egypt and translate hieroglyphs on a wall. It's just wonderful. Anyway, the very important thing to understand is that at any period of time in Egypt, multiple language stages existed. So for example, if you look at, this is the Old Kingdom, here's the Middle Kingdom, and then these are the New Kingdom dynasties. Let's just look at the 18th dynasty, for example. So the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom, the oldest language stage would be the theology, because obviously theology, you don't want to change that. That should be slow in adopting new language forms. And so I just think about how some people very much value the King James Bible. They value it because they don't want to change so quickly they may lose something. And in doing that, it's kind of the same kind of idea. And so theology changed late. So at this period, 18th dynasty, classical Middle Egyptian was spoken, and also the newer late Middle Egyptian was spoken. This is in written languages. Official communication of the state was up to date. It was the modern late Middle Egyptian language. Literature also was written in the same late Middle Egyptian. But the common people on the street, the people who were talking, they weren't using this language. They were using day-to-day language. So think about Shakespeare, for example. Shakespeare's language versus our language. It's changed quite a lot. And so you might, unless you were trained in it, you might not be able to read or understand classical Middle Egyptian, but you would probably be able to understand these two. So 3 language stages were actually being used at the very, very same time. Well, if you come over here to the Ptolemaic period, this is where the Rosetta Stone was an official state communication. It was the priests telling the people something that happened about taxes. And so here we shouldn't be surprised to find that Neo-Middle Egyptian and also Demotic and Greek were being used all at the same period of time. And that's why the Rosetta Stone has the 3 different language stages on it. So that kind of, and also down here you can see the scripts actually, Greek script, Demotic script, and then also hieratic and hieroglyph also all being used at the same time. So this was a very literate period of time. This one here and this one here are very literate, and a lot of things going on. Anyway, to show you that, well, by the way, before I go back, stay here for a second. This is the reason why I believe Moses said at the burning bush, I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Moses didn't stutter. It doesn't appear he had a stuttering problem at all. I know this is shocking to some people. They think, oh, he stuttered. But think about what Stephen says in the book of Acts. We'll talk about this in the sermon tomorrow a little bit. But I'll give you a picture here for those that are here and those who are watching online, so you know what I'm talking about tomorrow. When Stephen says in the book of Acts, Moses was mighty in word and deed, well, you can't be mighty in word if you have a stuttering problem. See, the Egyptians valued being able to speak well. By the way, my wife reminds me I speak fast. So if I speak too fast, tell me to slow down. I think David Asherek and I were born to the same mother somewhere, but even though they were different mothers, we have the same problem. So if you tell me to slow down, I don't take offense. Just say, slow down. You're going too fast. So Moses was mighty in word when he was a prince. But at the burning bush, he said, I'm slow of speech. I can't speak. Well, that's because Moses realized that the Egyptians value the ability to speak. And if he goes back, having not spoken Egyptian in 40 years, and he tries to speak, he's going to stumble because the language the spoken day-to-day language had just changed in that time period. And as it was developing, maybe he didn't understand the nuances, the double entendres, the wordplay that was very common. And that's why God said, well, I'm going to send Aaron, because while you were speaking 40 years, your poor brother was still a slave for 40 years. He's been the whole time he can speak. So I think that's more what's going on. That's a different topic for another time. So anyway, we can come back to that in questions and answers if you want. Well, because of what happened by the French, Egyptomania took over. People became very excited about Egypt. And they had mummy unwrappings where people would actually sit in an audience and they would actually watch mummies getting unwrapped. They were so excited. Some people even had mummies that were ground up into powder because they thought there was some medicinal value in drinking powdered mummy. It's craziness. And of course, that as a historian or an archaeologist, it makes me cringe because I can't imagine all that was lost in that time. But people got very, very excited. This is also the same time that Tutankhamun's tomb was found by Howard Carter. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow afternoon. The pyramids, so the pyramid fields, and so the archaeologists came, they flooded the whole area, and there's a lot of things that went on at that time. We won't go into all of it, but the pyramid fields are all up here in the north area. There also are a few down here in Thebes. We'll show you pictures of those here in a second. And so when we're talking about pyramids, we're talking about pyramids here and here. And by the way, always on the west side of the Nile, because they believed that when you die, as the sun is born in the east and it dies in the west, I don't know what direction the church is, I can't do it, but just imagine this is east, this is west, dies in the west, then same thing with humans. When you die, you go to the land of the west and you die in the west. So the pyramids and the tombs are always on the west side. But some of them are in the north here, the pyramids, and there's a few things down here in Thebes I'll show you. Let's go show you what all these pyramids are. This picture is a picture of all the pyramids. Some of these pyramids, these are all royal pyramids, by the way. There are some like non-royal pyramids, kingly pyramids, like queen pyramids and a few others. But these are all the pyramids, and we'll go through some of these bit by bit so you can see a picture of them. I don't expect you to read any of this, but this here is Saqqara. So if you're looking down in Egypt, by the way, I was just there in December, it looks the same today. You cross over from the green land that's watered by the Nile. Talk about that again tomorrow afternoon a little bit more. You cross over and immediately you're in the desert. It's just literally a line of sand. You're looking at green grass here, and now you're looking at sand. It's just that distinct. And so they're buried in the desert area, and this step pyramid was one of the first ones built. It probably was the first one built. This is at Saqqara. It's Doja's pyramid. And by the way, let me go back one. It's the same kind of pyramid, same kind of scheme as those very early burials by kings. They were called mastaba, just like a rectangle or a square platform, except that he put, or his architect Imhotep put a bunch of them on top of each other and made this kind of pyramid shape. Well, the tomb is actually in the ground underneath it. And so if you get a chance to go to visit Saqqara, you will actually go in the south side. There's a little area. The main entrance actually is in the north side. But during the Babylonian period, when Daniel was in Babylon, people in Egypt were trying, there's a 26th dynasty, they were trying to restore some of these old monuments. So they wanted to restore the step pyramids. They dug a tunnel, and this is actually the tunnel they dug. I'm going to see, can we get a chance to, I don't know if we can play this. Will it play? There we go, okay. We had a chance for you to actually walk through it with me. Restored. This, by the way, this opened up just recently. So this is the first time I was in it this last December. So all these pillars you see are all from the time period, that Babylonian time period, but again, in Egypt, the tiles on the floor are all new. But you can kind of see the lighting, of course, all is new. But you can imagine walking through this. You see, I'm getting your way, Pastor. As you come down this long passageway that comes in towards the burial chamber at the very end of it. As you get all the way down, I'll show you some unique things on the next slide, but as you get down here, you'll see the roof of this burial chamber, and then 5 stories down to the sarcophagus below. And you can see, if it pauses there, you can see actually 4 different entrances here. You can see an entrance here, there's an entrance over here quite a bit up, and another one down here, because they had all this maze of tunnels trying to hope to confuse anybody who tried to come in so they couldn't actually find it, or that they would actually kill themselves by accident by falling off. And I shouldn't laugh, but that's what they were trying to do. But anyway, so you kind of see a picture there. I want you to also notice this wood here and here, that's all from the time period of the 26th dynasty. That's all the time period of the Babylonians. So while Daniel and his friends were over in Babylon, this is what they were doing over here. This wood is from that time period. I don't know if you can see these little white dots in the ceiling here. Those are all bolts, really thick bolts, very, very long bolts to hold up the stones so they don't fall in. This is what they've been doing all these years so that tourists can now come in and see, or visitors and archaeologists can come in and see it without having any danger of it collapsing on us. But that's amazing. Anyway, that's the very first pyramid that was built, and there are many others after it. So other step pyramids in the area, there's a few other step pyramids. The 3rd dynasty, it's all 3rd dynasty. And then in the 4th dynasty, Snefru moved to the south. So Saqqara is just over here. It's off the screen a little bit. Come down to Dashur, it's just south a little bit. And you have all these other pyramids here. Snefru built 3 pyramids. He built a black pyramid that actually has collapsed. He built a bent pyramid. They actually started it at an angle. Apparently it got too heavy and began to crack. So they finished it off, but then he didn't go in there. And then they had a red pyramid. We actually finished it. By the way, the red pyramid is one of my favorite pyramids. When I was there in 2007, I think, I was actually walking the director of archaeology at Andrews University. We were there together in a car driving around. And we stopped there. He had been here before, so it was too hot. He stayed in the car with the air conditioning, and he had me walk around because I hadn't been there yet. And so a security guard was with me. We were the only ones there. We couldn't go inside of it, so we walked all the way around it. And we got to, I think we probably walked this way. When we got over here to the east side, you see the vegetation of the Nile over here. To the east side, there's a little sun chapel made out of mud brick. And he showed me this mud brick, and he's like, hey, do you want to take one of these mud bricks with you? You can just take it. Of course, he wants me to give him some tip for that, some money. And I looked at the mud brick, and I was like, in my mind, I'm thinking, not only is this a modern mud brick, it's not ancient. He doesn't know I'm an archaeologist. I know it's not ancient. Mud brick doesn't look like that. I'll show you a picture of that some other time. But I also know that if I'm caught with that trying to get out, I'll never get back into Egypt again. So I thanked him very much for his generosity. But anyway, I didn't go in there, but I did get the chance to go here. See the bent pyramid back here in the distance. But the red pyramid, you can climb up here and go down the red pyramid. It's a long shaft. They don't have any pictures of it because they weren't allowed to take pictures at the time. A long shaft going down, and we got into this big open room like this. And at the far end of the room was a scaffolding, and up at the top of the scaffolding was another tunnel. Well, there was nobody in there that says I couldn't go up there, so I went up the scaffolding and into the tunnel, and it went back, and it opened up in another room just about as this big again, another one like it, and that's where the sarcophagus was. And it was cool for me because I didn't know what it looked like inside. So it felt like as if I was actually exploring this for the very, very first time, and it was kind of romantic idea of being in there by yourself. It was really, really cool. I'll actually take you inside the Great Pyramid here in a minute. So in the 4th dynasty also, further north now at Giza, this is modern Cairo, there's these, of course, the big pyramids that everybody always sees. Here's the Sphinx down here with the mortuary sun chapel here for Khafre. But Khufu's pyramid, the first one, the biggest one, is here. They actually originally all looked white. They actually were cased in white limestone, so when the sun hit them, it would gleam. It also managed to actually hide the entrance. So when you visit, here's a picture of me kind of giving you an idea of how big these stones are. So if I put my hand like this, you kind of get an idea of how big one of those stones is. But also look here at the ground, looking down. You see how they interlock? They didn't cut them like in rectangles. They actually cut them to interlock, so you can't pull them out. You have to take them out the way they were put in, like a jigsaw puzzle in order to get it out. And so if you're standing here, you see where I'm standing. I'm actually standing on part of the pyramid that still remains. It's this part right here. And you see all of this was robbed out. So all the way to this line right here, this is all the white limestone casing that should go all the way up. So all of that is actually missing all the way up the pyramid. That was stolen. Well, it's stolen. I shouldn't use those terms, even though I believe it. It was borrowed to be reused in the mosque of Muhammad Ali, not the boxer, but the leader of the Muslims there in Cairo. So they repurposed the limestone. So all that is gone, but it should actually go all the way out here. Well, if they took it away, so they actually, if you look at this picture up here in the corner, this is the actual entrance of the pyramid, but they had to blast holes to try to figure out how to get in. This is many, many, many years, obviously, ago. And so this is actually where you enter in. So you enter in where these guards are. I got a chance this last December to go. Usually this is filled up, but because of COVID, everything, there was almost nobody there. There was nobody else in this pyramid with me when I went in this time. It was just, again, an amazing experience. I actually brought a young graduate student in with me so he could see it for the first time. This is my second time going in. But my first time, just us, the only ones in there. And so you walk in through this tunnel. This is the tunnel right here. You can see it right here in the diagram. And we're going to walk down this tunnel here and catch up with the slope of this tunnel right there. So actually walking down, and then you're going to come into this little modern staircase that brings you up to what the original entrance is. And this is what you see. So as you're walking up this entrance, you're going to climb. You're actually going to be in like this kind of crouching position as you're walking up that ramp all the way up. A kind of crouching position all the way up. It's very, you see how long it is. It's quite long to get to this gallery area. So the gallery area is next. And the gallery area, this is me standing right at the base of this. So this door behind me is the entrance to this passageway that goes to number 6. It's blocked off. We can't go there. So we're going to actually go up and around these stairs and go all the way up here. This is the gallery. This is actually the top looking down. So this is the bottom looking up. And this is the main gallery area that you see a lot of pictures of. And then at the very, very top of the gallery, right here, in this area here, is this little space. You actually have to crawl to get through from the gallery into the actual burial chamber. And this of course, is these little rope lines here where the ropes were actually coming down to hold these stone blocks. Because the whole thing was they wanted to have these stone blocks blocking it off. And actually what they did was they had the stone blocks, and then they had these granite plugs that on that gallery went all the way down, actually went all the way down from here, all the way down, and actually blocked it off. All this was blocked off in stone. So that what we crawled through up the ramp like this, going up that would all be filled with stone. So you had to blast through all of that to get up into here. And eventually cut through all of these and get those out. They don't exist. These don't exist anymore. They're all gone. And then finally you get into the burial chamber. And this is the burial chamber. Here's a little crawl space you crawl through to get there. And you walk into this big burial chamber. It's just there's no decoration. Sorry. There's no decoration. It's just all there is a stone sarcophagus at the opposite end of the room. And that's where Khufu would have been buried. But I want you to notice, this is the Old Kingdom. This is granite. Granite comes from Aswan, way in the south. It has to be brought all the way up. And then look at the precision of these lines. You can't get a piece of paper between those. That's how accurate that is. The technology they had to cut granite that well and shape it so well, that's how it looks today after all this time. It's just quite remarkable. They also cut into the granite these little shafts, air shafts that go up and out. I think a few years ago, you may have seen news reports about this. They actually have discovered voids, big voids in the pyramids. And if you get a chance to go to the pyramids, go to the light and sound show at night. They had this laser sound show. They showed on the pyramids themselves. And when they show you the actual diagram, this little diagram right here, you realize how much space there is that it's not. It's supposed to be the stone, but now we know there's actually voids there. So the question is now, how do we get there without destroying them? See what's in them. So there may possibly be some very important things we don't know. But anyway, I want to show you that. There's other pyramids they're not as great, from the 4th dynasty. Most of the pyramids look like this. They're collapsed over time. They were also robbed out. Here's some more here. See the great pyramids here in the back over there. And then we're going to get into the 5th dynasty and the 6th dynasty. In the 6th dynasty, something unique happened. This is Unis's pyramid at Saqqara. It's not much of a pyramid anymore. It's mostly just rubble. But again, the tomb area is down below. So you crawl down below, and you go through another tunnel, and you come over. And this is the first time where they actually inscribed the walls with spells, spells for the afterlife. These spells, the pyramid text became coffin texts in the Middle Kingdom, where they wrote them on coffins. And then in the New Kingdom, they wrote them on papyrus called the Book of the Dead. You're probably familiar with that. It's the same spells. They began all the way back here in the 6th dynasty. Well, after the 6th dynasty, I have a little video here, I guess, to show you of that one. I forgot that was there. It's just going to show you some of the carvings again. This is carvings in stone. And so you can see the amazing carving. We're actually going to go into the burial chamber. Not in a second, we'll turn around and go to it. So some other antechamber there. We're going to turn around. You'll see some of my colleagues there on our project. This is actually how you get in. You crawl space to get in. But we're going to go over here to the left here and go through. Again, you see this is all carved in stone. It's amazing. And then get into the burial chamber where the sarcophagus is. And you can see kind of the decorations. It's just remarkable. We can talk, if you have any questions about this, we can talk some more about that later. But I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what this all looked like. That's Mark Jansen, the leader of our project at Karnak. Anyway, so the 8th dynasty began the first intermediate period. You see how big the people are compared to the pyramids. They're very, very dinky. They're not very big anymore. And then in the Middle Kingdom, they made big pyramids again, but this time they made them out of mud brick. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Mud brick pyramids. This is now further south at Lisht. And then in the New Kingdom, there's nothing in the second intermediate period. In the New Kingdom, this is the only pyramids you have. They're actually just tombs with a little bit of a pyramid at the front. It's not really much of a pyramid. So the New Kingdom is a time where there's not very many pyramids. And then we have down in the south during the third intermediate period, in the late period, down in Nubia. Nubia actually had some pyramids as well. Here's a fellow here. You see they're much more upright. They're a little bit different shape. This is very, very south. It's in Sudan area, if you're keeping track of that in modern day. All right, so did Israel build any of those? Were they involved in building any of those pyramids? Well, that depends on when they were in Egypt. So now we're going to transition to the chronology section. We know a little about Egypt now. What is the date of the Exodus? Well, 1 Kings 6:1, it says, And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is important, which is the 2nd month, keep that in your mind, then that he began to build the house of the Lord. So they're saying when the time he built the house of the Lord in the 4th year of Solomon, you go back 480 years, and that's the time of the Exodus. So the month of Ziv, the 2nd month of his 4th year, is 967. So if we take that date, 967, remember you're going back in BC dates, so you're adding 480, you would get an Exodus date of 1447 BC. Now, there's reasonable ways to shift that around a little bit to 1452 to 1445. For this presentation today and tomorrow, I'm going to use the 1447 BC because that's the more math accurate. It's easier to kind of understand date. So we're going to use that date. Just realize that conservative scholars, a lot of scholar colleagues at Andrews would go one way or the other within this date range based on different variations. So that's okay. So the question, though, I have my colleagues in Egypt, Mark Jansen, I showed you a picture of him in a minute ago. They actually believe that this date here, this 480-year period, is actually symbolic. So I have friends, colleagues at Andrews who I agree with, or believe it's literal, but there's others who believe it's symbolic, and they have good reasons to believe this. They believe this, maybe this is a rounded number. Others believe maybe 480 years is actually an estimate. It's 12 40-year periods. There's no real way to really get that from the text, but they're thinking generations. And so they think the 480 is not reliable, since 1 Kings is written so long after the Exodus event that possibly the real figure is something about 300, basically. And they have mathematical ways to kind of try to figure all that out. So they get an Exodus date of 1267. We'll come back to that tomorrow afternoon in a little bit more detail. But for now, for this presentation, we're going to stick with the literal one so you can kind of keep up with what we're doing. So when were they in Egypt? So if they left in 1447 BC, which is what I'm going to present to you tonight, then when did they enter? Because that would kind of give some idea of when the pyramids are built and whether the pyramids are built. Length of the sojourn. Well, Exodus 12:40, the Masoretic text, which is the text you read in your Bible. Almost all modern translations use the Masoretic text. It says, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years, which makes it sound like they lived in Egypt for 430 years. The LXX, the Septuagint, remember we talked about that being written at the time of either the first Ptolemy or second Ptolemy for the Library of Alexandria. That text actually is a much earlier text, and it says, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt and Canaan was 430 years. So the 430 years is divided between Egypt and Canaan. And there seems to be biblical support for either one of these positions. The Egypt-only Masoretic text would, no matter which way you do it, the math is the same. So 430 years earlier than the Exodus would put you in 1877. So it doesn't matter. What does change, though, is the event. So if it's 430 years is only in Egypt, then that means that the sojourn in Egypt, they came into Egypt in 1877. However, if 430 years is Egypt and Canaan, then that means the Abraham sojourn began in 1877. So the dates are the same, but the event would be different. And I'll show you how that works here. So let's go to the just in Egypt. So the 430 years just in Egypt only. Genesis 15 says, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in the land. This is God promising to Abraham in the covenant that the land is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. So it seems that kind of supports this Egypt-only concept. Acts 7 kind of echoes this, so it's not anything new. It's again, that's Stephen before the Sanhedrin, and he kind of reiterates that. There's going to be 400 years of affliction. So the Egypt-only scholars would say, a position would say that the 400 years is simply a rounded figure of the 430. That's how they kind of figure that. Now the Egypt and Canaan, so this is a sojourn beginning with Abraham, 430 years in Egypt and Canaan. Looks at Galatians. So Paul writes in Galatians, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And this I say that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant. Paul is saying in Galatians that the law given at Sinai, which is the same year, it's 2 months after the Exodus, is 430 years after the promise was given to Abraham. So Paul seems to suggest that the 430 years is in Egypt and Canaan. So how do we understand this? So the Egypt only would say maybe Paul was making a mistake. Maybe Paul was referencing the Septuagint, which maybe made an error. The Egypt and Canaan side would say the 400 years is not a rounded figure of 430 years, but rather it's a period of affliction and not sojourn. So let me show you what that looks like. So 430 years in Egypt and Canaan position would say 430 years of sojourn, Exodus 12. And then the 400 years that Genesis talks about is 400 years of affliction. They both end at the Exodus event, but they begin 30 years apart, possibly with the weaning of Isaac. 25 years after Abraham was in the land of, 75 years old, he left Ur, and he got, at age 100, Isaac was born. Isaac was weaned a few years after that, and maybe at that weaning party when Ishmael, who was half Egyptian, did what he did, that would be this 30-year period of affliction beginning. That's the theory of how that works. So here's this, and also to support that idea, by the way, this is Paul's idea in Galatians, and I'm going to kind of go with Paul because I don't want to argue with Paul. But Galatians, Genesis 15 says, along with this affliction, is 400 years. It also says, but in the fourth generation, they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. This is still Genesis 15. So were there only 4 generations in Egypt? Well, actually, Exodus 6 says there were. It actually mentions Levi, born in Canaan. Kohath, of course, was born in Canaan because they both came to Egypt at Exodus 1. And then there were 4 generations born in Egypt. Amram was Kohath's son, born in Egypt. Aaron, of course, Aaron and Moses were born of Amram. Eliezer was Aaron's son, born in Egypt. And Phineas was born, all mentioned. 4 generations. Actually, what that tells me is that God came on time. 4 generations they shall return, and in 4 generations God appeared and took them out of Egypt. It seems to me like Exodus 6 confirms that the 400 years that Genesis was talking about was actually not a rounded figure of the 430, but rather, like Paul says, it's probably the affliction. So, based on internal chronology of the Bible, which, by the way, Pastor mentioned that I'm actually work at Andrews University Press. I'm the associate director. I'm actually the managing editor of the Andrews Study Bible and the New Andrews Bible Commentary. I'll actually bring a Bible commentary tomorrow to show everybody. But the Andrews Bible Commentary actually has a chronology in it. And so the chronology in it will show you these dates, but it also will show you the alternate dates of the Egypt only. So if you want to have both, you have both of them in there. Okay, so how does this look? Okay, how does this all play out? So let's just get all these theories together and answer our question. 430 years all in Egypt, and literal, that means they left in the 18th dynasty. 430 years in Egypt and Canaan, literal, again, 18th dynasty, because it's all literal. The symbolic would have them leaving in the 19th dynasty in 1267. But 430 years all in Egypt has them entering a second intermediate period here, second intermediate period here. This is the only one that has them coming in the Middle Kingdom. So it's a little bit of 3 different options that give you 3 possibilities. All of them have them leaving in the New Kingdom, but they have them coming in a different place. So there's an awful lot. When were they in Egypt? I'm going to say second intermediate period because, again, I'm going to go with Galatians. So I'm going to say they came in the second intermediate period, and the 430 years was between Egypt and Canaan. And so if that's 1660 to 1447, that would be the early New Kingdom. In Genesis 50, Joseph said to his brothers, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you. He says it twice here. And you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him. He was put in a coffin in Egypt. God will surely visit you. When I think about that message, God will surely visit you, and I think about the chronology in the Bible that God says, in 400 years of affliction, I'm going to take you out. 430 years is going to be a time, after that 430 years is over, of sojourn from Abraham promised you'll get this land. 430 years later, God takes his people out. And I think about the 4 generations. I see God is on time. And even though it didn't happen in Joseph's life, Joseph still died with the promise on his lips that God will surely visit you. And I think as Adventists, this is our message. God is going to surely visit us. He promises he's going to visit us. He may not have visited when my grandparents were alive. They're now passed away. But my grandparents told me that he was coming, and I believe that he's coming. He's going to come on time. I may not understand the chronology of it, but I believe he's going to come on time because I see him coming on time here in this story. Well, did Israel build the pyramids? So the pyramids, I don't think so. My answer would be no, because I think based on Paul's chronology in Galatians and Exodus 6 chronology, the 4 generations in Egypt, I think they came in during the second intermediate period, and they left in the New Kingdom. Everybody believes they left in the New Kingdom, so that doesn't change. And there was no pyramids really built in that time period. But there's an outside chance that if the 430 years is just in Egypt, then that means they could have been in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom. And remember, there were pyramids built in the Middle Kingdom, and they were made out of mud brick. So it's possible. We've got to answer that, get a little more into that tomorrow afternoon. So I think the pyramids were all built before they arrived, but there's an outside chance. And I have some colleagues at Andrews who believe the Middle Kingdom was when they came in, so it's possible. Okay, but what does the ancients say? Herodotus said, and he's a Greek historian, he actually, this is what he wrote in his histories, in the second book of the histories. He said, that's Khufu. Khufu is the pyramid, the great pyramid I took you in a little bit ago. He bade all the Egyptians work for him of this oppression their past 10 years for foundation works. For the making the pyramid itself passed a period of 20 years. So he says there's 30 years to build the entire great pyramid. And he says the Egyptians did it. The Egyptians worked for him. Well, Mark Lerner, remember that quote at the very beginning? We mentioned Mark Lerner gave you that pyramid text quote. This is Mark Lerner. He's an expert. He's worked on these pyramids his whole life. He's been working this whole area. He's actually discovered the pyramid builders' village right here. You see the great pyramids in the back? This is where they lived. This is actually the tombs of the pyramid builders. And the pyramid builders are all Egyptian. They didn't use slaves to build these great pyramids. Maybe during the Middle Kingdom, the Hebrews built them, but these Old Kingdom pyramids were not built by the Hebrews. These were already done many, many years earlier, and they were done by Egyptians. In fact, the Egyptians lived in, they worked in groups. There's actually a scroll just recently found at the Dead Sea. Have you seen this one? I'm sorry, the Red Sea. Have you seen the scroll? Have you heard about it? It was found maybe a year, well, it's been found a little bit ago. I guess it's been a little bit of time now. But on it, actually, it talks about how the pyramids were built. We've been wondering for years how they were built. We know how they were built. We don't know exactly how the stones got in place, but we know they worked in groups. And they worked a group in the quarries, a group that transported to the boats, a group to transport the boats all the way up the river, down river, and then a group that would actually unload them and keep them to the site, and a group that would shape them, and a group that would put them in place. So now we know they worked by groups. But Mark Lerner and his team actually found graffiti. This actually is the Khufu gang. Actually, it says the Friends of Khufu gang is how you translate that graffiti there. So they actually thought that the king was their friend. They actually were all paid. They were fed and paid, and they believed that they did this as that they owed the king a debt. This debt, Bach, is a debt that they owed the king for their very existence. Well, there's a question recently by one of my favorite politicians who didn't make it to the White House, but Ben Carson suggested many years ago that maybe the pyramids were used to store grain by Joseph, for we know that's not how the Egyptians stored grain. This is actually how grain was stored in these kind of silos like this. They actually were put into big jars, sealed jars, and then stacked in this plastered, it's not plastered anymore, but a plastered kind of silos kind of area. And we know that the pyramids were actually used for sarcophagus for burying. They weren't grain silos, and they wouldn't actually work very well for that either. So unfortunately, that wasn't true. Did they build the pyramids? I don't think they built the pyramids. Some of my colleagues suggest that it's possible. But did they see the pyramids? We'll answer that question tomorrow afternoon. We're talking about where the Hebrews lived, so we'll do that later. All right, that's the presentation. We'll open up now to questions. Is there any questions? It's a lot, I know. Is it kind of cool to go inside the pyramids? I think it's cool to go inside and see them. I hope someday you can go inside the pyramid. Has anybody been to Egypt? So you've been to the pyramids. So you know how great it is. It's pretty cool. It's hot. It's hot. Yes, sir.
Do you think the landscape around the area where the pyramids are was always a desert terrain, or do you think it's vastly changed over the thousands of years?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. So I think by the time the Egyptians were building the pyramids, it always was desert because of their cosmology and what they believed that meant. But there is evidence that at some point in the past, the deserts weren't actually, they were actually green. There actually was a lot more water in the area. There's actually, I believe in a universal global flood, and there is actual evidence that there was actual water there that receded down. And then very, very quickly after that, it became desert area. So there was actually, for a very short time, a lot of plants and vegetation there. Yeah, that's very, very, very good. In fact, the whole landscape around the pyramids themselves has changed quite a lot as far as where the Nile was at. I think I'll show you that tomorrow. Yes, ma'am.
Did you see any cat mummies?
Yes, okay, so at Saqqara, not far from Unis's pyramid actually, there's actually a whole burial of just cat mummies honoring the god Bastet. And so there's a lot of, a whole cemetery just of cat mummies they found. In fact, Saqqara is this huge burial site, and they keep finding more and more stuff there. Right? When I was there in 2007, there was they had a lot of few things there. Now it's 2021, last December. There's stuff everywhere. They're finding more things. They actually found recently even a place where they actually did the mummy. They actually wrapped the mummies deep underground. We've always wondered where they did it. They did it actually underground. So they actually found cat mummies there. You can see some in a museum. If you go to a museum there in Egypt, you actually can see some there. Well, yeah, you got cats. Yeah.
I was thinking on some of those pictures that you had, you mentioned the Tower Sudan mine that you went to when you were in 3rd grade. Yes. Some of them remind me of that. Were there bats in there too?
There can be bats. In fact, some of the pyramids that are not monitored, yeah, there's a lot of bats, and you can smell the guano. And yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Nothing worse than the oppressive heat and the smell of guano. That's awful. That's awful. Yes.
So then you could say that whoever you had for a teacher back then, who brought you in that mine, was responsible for your success in the future, right? You could say that.
Yes, and in fact, this teacher you're speaking of actually taught me how to paint. I still have that painting. It's amazing to see you after all these years. I wouldn't have recognized you if you had said something. You probably don't recognize me either. I was a little guy at the time. 3rd grade. Third grade, yes. So this guy, he taught me not only how to paint, he actually, and it's amazing. You look at perspective, and the colors, it's just, my brother's painting, he was in 2nd grade, it's rubbish, but mine actually looks fantastic. We actually built a frozen pond. I still remember, this is how great this year was of mine. I remember so much from this year. We built little wigwams out of tree bark. We had a frozen pond where we went ice skating. We built a little path there. We played tackle football in the snow. I remember all kinds of things. Marble. That was that's 1 year. 3rd grade. Who can remember 3rd grade? I remember 3rd grade because of you. Wow, it's so nice to shake your hand. I haven't seen you forever. Oh, so good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was wonderful. He was a very clever teacher. So I've been a teacher, and I've actually used some of the things I learned in 3rd grade by watching him, analyzing it years later. We were a very talkative group, I guess, and at one point he had the very clever idea of putting a piece of chalk up on the chalkboard and saying, if you guys think really hard, you might be able to knock this chalk over with your minds. And so for the next 15 minutes, we were all silent trying to knock this over with our minds, and that's how he got us to be quiet for, it was one, I've used that. That's actually fantastic. It's fantastic.
Are there pyramids anywhere else?
So in Egypt, I've showed you where all the pyramids actually are. She asked if there's any pyramids anywhere else. Those are all the pyramids. Most of the pyramids are just little rubble. The big pyramids, of course, are the more popular ones because you can actually see them. They're made of stone. The early ones are made of stone. Later ones are made out of mud brick, and they kind of collapse for time. But that's really all the pyramids there are in Egypt. There's quite a few of them. I mean, there's a handful of them, but. Oh, but around the world, yeah. Okay, so around the world, that's not a very good. That's an interesting question. In almost all the ancient civilizations, there are pyramids, and the question is, why would there be pyramids in all these ancient civilizations, unless there was a common memory? Jan Osman, who's an Egyptian Egyptologist, he's a scholar. He calls it menumo-history. It's the history of memory. It's history as it's remembered, and how memory then uses history. And so, if you see something in different cultures, they have a very similar pattern, and they must all have a common origin. And so you see this very early pyramid kind of building these new civilizations all around the world, kind of going around the world. They must have some kind of origin. I speculate, okay, this is all speculation, so don't write this down. But I look at Revelation, and I look at the New Jerusalem, and the New Jerusalem is the same height as it is square, right? There's only 2 shapes in the world that can do that I know of anyway. One is a cube, and one's a pyramid. The pyramid to me makes a lot more sense because the pyramid actually, the wall of the city is not as high as the city itself. So the city of the New Jerusalem is much higher than the wall itself is described as being. And that makes more sense if it's a pyramid. Also, if you look at Revelation 20, when the wicked are raised up and they attack the New Jerusalem, and Jesus comes and appears in his throne. Ellen White says that he appears at the top of the city so that all can see him. At kind of a top, and they all can see. Well, a pyramid would allow him to do that. If it was a cube shape, that'd be he had to be on the edge somehow, and how could everybody see him on the edge? It'd be very difficult. A pyramid, no problem whatsoever. And so I kind of think that, and I go back to the Garden of Eden in Genesis, and in Genesis 2, it mentioned that there were 4 rivers that came from the Garden of Eden, and from those 4 rivers, the whole world was watered. It doesn't tell us the shape of the Garden of Eden, but since water goes downhill, then that Garden of Eden must have been higher elevation than everything else. And there's 4 of them. It's possible they were going on 4 sides. So maybe this original mound of creation, which, by the way, the Egyptians believe these pyramids would represent the mound of creation. It's very possible that it's a memory going back of the Garden of Eden. So it's possible that memory came down through the ark to the Tower of Babel and then kind of went out to civilizations who made these very sacred mounds, which is what the Egyptians called these pyramids. They call them the sacred mounds. And it's possible. Anyway, that's pure speculation on my part. Take that for what it's worth. Throw it away. If you don't like it, it doesn't matter to me. That won't hurt my feelings. Any other? Yes, in the back.
Thank you for that excellent presentation. So I've got a question. You mentioned that there were groups of people that I'm assuming were skilled laborers to build these things. Does that infer that these were not necessarily slaves doing this, or were these skilled workers that worked for a period of 25, 30 years on their skill to build these pyramids?
Right, so Herodotus, he comes in obviously in the Greek period, so he's much, much later. He's during the Ptolemaic period. And so he wrote, well, anyway, he's much, much later. He wrote that the Egyptians were the ones that built it, not slaves. And the tombs and then the cities seem to suggest that that's the same thing. So what we seem to see, we see this all the way through Egyptian history, the pyramids, but also in the New Kingdom when they made a lot of temples, they actually would, so Egypt calendar year was divided into 3 seasons. Those 3 seasons are the season of flooding. So it's 4 months with the Nile floods, and all land, agricultural land, it's all underwater. Everything's underwater. And so the only place you can work is in the desert area, which is higher up on the sides, or the temples, the little mounds where the temples are at. That's the only place you can work. Then the second season is when the water came down, the fields were fertilized with their black silt, and they planted. And then the third season is the harvest, where they harvested. So that's their whole season. So during the time of the flooding, throughout history, the pharaohs would get the people, the local Egyptians, to go work for them. This is very clever. In my seminary, one of my seminary classes for MDiv, they said, how do you keep the church from fighting? Well, you put them to work. So if they're working, they can't argue about what the person sitting next to them is doing. So you put them to work. That's passed out. You can take that one. You probably know that already. You put them to work, right? So you put them to work, and so they put the Egyptians to work building these monuments. And so the same people who were skilled in whatever work they did normally would then be laborers cutting stone, but those who weren't would be used in transportation. They probably used the fishermen for the boats to transport things, and they'd use other people to cut things into quarries, and so they would divide people up, and through that 4 months of flooding, they would be building these things for the king. So the question I have is, would they have certain people building all year round, or would it only be in those 4 months? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows the answer. That's very good. But they weren't slaves. It doesn't appear they were slaves. At least in the Old Kingdom. Yes?
Doesn't it talk about later that they built the city of Ramses or helped build it slaves?
Yeah.
So what was that about?
Sure. So tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have 2 presentations. One is going to be where the Hebrews lived, where I'm going to talk about that very topic, so I'll say that for tomorrow. And hopefully you'll be here tomorrow. And then the second presentation is who the Pharaoh of the Exodus is. So based on this presentation of chronology, based on tomorrow where the Hebrews lived, we should be able to narrow down who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was based on these 2 presentations. And so there'll be 2 presentations in the afternoon. I'll cover that tomorrow. That's a good question about the building. And that may actually help us also answer that. Were the pyramids in the Middle Kingdom, were they built by the Hebrews? We can answer that tomorrow as well, I think, with that. Yes?
Are they still finding tombs? Not necessarily in pyramids, right? Yeah. Sometimes they're just underground.
Yeah.
king touched to it wasn't a pyramid.
Right. So even in the Valley of the Kings, they're still finding tombs. And I'm going to show you some of that again in the second presentation tomorrow afternoon about the Pharaoh. We'll go to the Valley of the Kings, and I'll show you a few of those. At Saqqara, they're finding tombs. You throw a stone and you're going to find a tomb in Saqqara. They're everywhere. And because the sand over the years has covered things up, it takes a lot of work to move that. But once you move it, you're finding all kinds of things. And so Saqqara is such a rich area for tombs because wherever the king was at, the local people wanted to be buried close by. The Egyptians did not kill, contrary to some reports, they did not kill people, their servants, when they died. Even in the Old Kingdom, none of that never ever happened in Egypt. There's no evidence whatsoever for that. But people did, when they died, they want to be buried next to the king. And so you won't see great death pits in Egypt, but you will see burials right around the king, all kind of clustered around, so that they can serve the king in the afterlife and have whatever glory he has, they can have their share in it. So that's why when you find the big pyramids, you find also tombs everywhere around. Yeah, the more you dig, the more we find. Yeah, it's actually quite exciting. You know, Flinders Petrie, I don't know if you've heard of his name, but he was actually considered to be the father of Egyptian archaeology. He, in 1800s, he was digging, early 1900s in Egypt. He's actually the one who systematized stratigraphy and all these kind of things. He's an amazing guy. Anyway, he thought when he was a kid, when he was a boy, that everything was going to be found in Egypt before he got old enough to go do something. And now he's passed away long, long ago. And now I've grown up, and now I'm there, and they're still finding stuff. And so Egypt is so fascinating. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe tomorrow we'll have some more questions based on tomorrow's presentation. I look forward to seeing you. I think I'll be speaking in the morning for a message and sermon. We'll talk a little bit about Moses and what we can learn from Moses' experience. And then in the afternoon, where the Hebrews lived and who the Pharaoh of Exodus was. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baker, Jr. Thank you so much. I just want to say a few things because tomorrow, after Dr. Baker Jr.'s presentation, he has to leave right away because on Sunday, he has another presentation at the seminary. So if you have questions during potluck, during the day, feel free to ask him because as soon as he's done after Q&A, a few minutes for Q&A, right, he would have to leave so he can make it there on time for his next presentation. I wasn't going to say it today, but since my friend Scotty gave it away, and I was going to do that tomorrow, but I'll do it tonight. Dr. Baker's not alone here. He brought, is it better half? Absolutely. Okay, he brought his better half. His wife, Arnie Baker, is here with us today. And tomorrow I'll do a longer introduction for you, Dr. Baker. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your participation. And while you're at home thinking of this presentation, if you have more questions, write them down. Write them down, and during the Q&A, you can always ask them. And those who are watching online, if you have questions, write it in the chat or email us. Email us or put it in the comments, and then we'll pass it on to Dr. Baker Jr., and he'll be speaking and doing his best to answer those questions, right? So as you're getting ready to go, let's all stand for prayers, and then we will meet back here tomorrow for service time. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we are so grateful to be in your presence. This is your Sabbath hours, and we are longing to see your face. So as we beginning this presentation this weekend, we pray that your Spirit may dwell in our hearts and enlighten us to understand things that we have probably had doubt before or even had trouble understanding. Let your Spirit help us to see clear in those presentation and those situations that people are discussing for many, many, many years. So as we are about to part our ways to go into our home to rest for the night, may your Holy Spirit guide us, may he take us home safe, and may we have a blessed night and wake up to come and worship you in the Spirit and the truth in your sanctuary. Thank you, Father, for your love and kindness in our lives. Be with us, bless us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everyone. May you have a blessed night.